We shall commence this module by discussing the need of market-friendly reforms in India. Prior to 1991, India was perceived to be a socialist straitjacket, and there was an impending need to bring about market-friendly reforms. India's untapped markets and enormous resource potential always attracted the foreign investors, but they were apprehensive and reluctant due to the prevalent archaic policies of the country. India had initiated some steps towards improving the investment climate in the late 80s, but the real process in the sincerity started only in 1991. This change was necessitated by a combination of internal and external factors such as deepening fiscal deficit, rising inflation, burgeoning the foreign debt, opening up of the world economy, and blurring of the geographical boundaries. Additionally, disintegration of USSR and the success of Southeast Asian countries by resorting to export promotion helped in making a landmark move from Nehru socialism to Western capitalism. The economic reforms were ushered devaluation of rupee, substantial reduction in import tariffs, abolishment of import licensing, and elimination of public sector monopolies in telecom, port, power, road and aviation. This indicated towards a systematic shift to a more open economy with greater reliance on the market dynamics, greater participation of the private sector, focused flow of the foreign investment, and change in the local government's approach and implementation process. The key characteristics of the economic policy of 1991 were providing access of global markets to domestic economy, stabilizing the economy through structural reforms, and reduction in the state intervention in domestic policy decisions. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the roles and needs for the MNCs in the emerging markets, know the pros and cons of the MNCs, understand the performance of MNCs in India. Let us now understand the need for MNCs in the emerging markets. The introduction of this policy underlined that the economy understood more than ever before the relationship between the domestic and the foreign industry needed to be much more dynamic than it had been in the past in terms of technology and investment. Multinational corporations known as MNCs are carriers of foreign capital. These firms by definition are industrial organizations which extend their industrial and marketing operations through a network of their branches in several countries. They provide services on a global scale, control the policies of their affiliates, and implement the business strategies in production, marketing, finance, and staffing that transcends the national boundaries. Developing economies are often characterized by the fact that domestic savings are often inadequate to support the amount of investment that is required for development, leading to a saving investment gap. NCER SEBI Household Survey of 2011 says India is a nation of savers. The problem with developing economy is the poor rate of mobilization of savings into investment. New industrial policy of 1991 aimed at the growth of economy through demand and supply side adjustments. Liberalization aimed at relaxing norms in various industries and inviting the investments from the private corporate sector, and globalization served as a mechanism to link the Indian economy to the world. MNCs were apparently a win-win combination for the Indian government. They could mobilize the savings of the Indian investors on one hand and bring along the benefits of technical and marketing economies of scale on the other. MNCs act as a conduit for bridging this gap in savings by bringing investments from abroad. This additional investment in the economy act as a catalyst leading to an increased need for labor that results in their increased income levels, thereby moving towards the income equality. MNCs are generally technologically superior to the domestic companies, and that is seen as a critical reason for which MNCs have been encouraged by the developing economies to participate in their industrial development. MNCs bring with them skills such as managerial ability, organizational competence, and the knack to avoid inefficiencies. The extent to which the domestic economy is able to absorb this new technology and expertise depends a lot on the level of education, existing skill set, and the quality of institutions that exist and are capable of providing the required training. Employment generation being a function of the rate of growth of investment and technology, an inherent inference is that MNCs provide direct employment opportunities to the more educated section of the working population. Further, there could also be indirect employment generated in the lower and the services sector occupations, thereby catering to some extent even to the relatively less educated and unskilled people. Ancillary units crop up close to the places where MNCs set up their production units, resulting in the job creation and skill development for the labor engaged in those units. Lifting of trade barriers opened the economy to a more extensive market that results in greater division of labor, increased efficiency, and consequently the higher production levels. MNCs, by drawing on their better management skills, technology, efficient distribution, and marketing networks, are able to assist the developing economy in gaining the access to external markets, which increase their efficiency and makes them more competitive internationally. Domestic units combining forces and or competing with MNCs directly or indirectly benefit from the better work culture norms and higher productivity standards that these foreign companies bring to the floor. In this context, MNCs can be viewed as setting the benchmarks, thereby contributing to the human resource development in general. Moving on to discuss that why MNC need emerging markets. MNCs are the private organizations and by nature are oriented toward profit maximization. To further their interest, these firms are on the constant lookout to expand their operations and market territory to new investment destinations. Armed with market reputation, proficient marketing tools, reliable information system, and efficient inventory management, these firms proceed with a clear intent to capture the largest share of the markets of the developing economies. MNCs have deep pockets and invest time and effort in customizing their products to the needs and requirement of the local markets. On the basis of their international reputation, they have relatively easier access to the domestic capital markets with large domestic investors and banks keen to be a part of their success stories. MNCs feed on the fact that developing countries regard transfer of technology useful as industrialization represents the surest and the fastest way out of the underdevelopment. With insufficient investment, the host country is unable to harness its potential in terms of natural resources, manpower and capital. Alternatively, depending totally on the local companies would require heavy imports of raw materials, capital equipment and machinery and technical knowledge, whereas MNCs bring these on their own. MNCs get easier access to the domestic markets as they perceive to assist the domestic country in producing the goods that meet the international standards and quality specifications. Next, we shall discuss the role of the MNCs in developing economies. MNCs have a vital role in the economic development of developing countries. These countries are not able to achieve the target rate of the economic growth as the domestically mobilized savings are not sufficient to meet the targeted investment. The most important contribution of MNCs is to bridge this resource gap and assist the developing countries in their economic development. MNCs aid in reduction of balance of payment deficit in a twofold manner by bringing in the foreign capital for setting up the operations in the host country, and secondly by generating a net positive flow of trade revenue. MNCs bring cheers to the domestic government by filling the coffers through payment of direct and indirect taxes. The additional revenue so generated provides financial resources to the local government to undertake development projects. MNCs bring sophisticated technological know-how about the production processes along with the modern machinery and equipment to capital challenged developing nations. The host country immensely benefits from these transfers of knowledge, skills and technology. Other concomitant advantages are more employment opportunities, higher real wages for the working population, better quality products for the consumers, more domestic investment in the form of setting up of auxiliary units, etc. Now, we will discuss the arguments against MNCs. Extending the logic that MNCs are not in social service, it is very important to realize that MNCs are driven by a clear vision of chasing greater revenues and higher profits. In their quest to garner higher market shares, MNCs may inhibit the expansion of domestic firms through exclusive production arrangements with the local government. This would also result in having little impact on the developing local skills and resources and stifling of the growth of the indigenous entrepreneurship. First, adverse impact on the forex earnings. From the developing countries' perspective, the aim of encouraging the MNC's investment is to improve the foreign exchange position. However, it may not so happen. In the long run, the operation of the MNCs may reduce the foreign exchange earnings on both the current and the capital account. The current account may fall prey to the extensive import of intermediate and capital goods, while the capital account may deteriorate on account of overseas repatriation of profits, interest, royalties, technical fees, etc. This flight of capital might put a drain on the foreign exchange reserves and accentuate the balance of payments deficit of the host country. Next, transfer pricing. With freer mobility of capital, the frequency of flight of profits and capital from one country to the other country would be higher. MNCs are often accused of indulging in transfer pricing. This refers to the practice of showing lower profits in the countries with higher tax rates and transfer them to the low tax countries to camouflage the capital outflow and lower tax liability. Hogwash with respect to generation of employment opportunities. MNCs may adopt capital intensive techniques for production which would help the more educated and generate fewer jobs and thus may not turn out to be useful for the labor surplus developing economies. The basic problem of poverty and unemployment, the two fundamental areas of concern for the developing countries, would thus not get addressed from this kind of investment. In fact, it would be counterproductive as it would exacerbate both the unemployment and income inequalities. Next, liberalized tax structures may reduce the funds needed for the public good. The developing countries, in their bid to attract more MNCs, might provide liberal tax concessions, cheap provision of sites, excessive investment allowances, subsidies and tariff protections to them, thereby lowering the expected contribution to public revenue in the form of corporate taxes. Next, lobbying for West favoring policies. MNCs, because of their immense financial power, enjoys political clout so as to influence the decision making processes in the developing countries. This endangers the autonomy and sovereignty of the host countries. Another criticism faced by MNCs is that to further their selfish interest, they might use their economic power to influence the policies of the government which might be unfavorable to the development. Consequently, private profits of MNCs may exceed the social benefits. The regions or states which are already well endowed in terms of infrastructure and availability of natural resources would be more probable recipient of the foreign investment. This has the potential to increase the regional disparities. Let us now determine the performance of MNCs. More than 2 decades have passed since Indian economy has set the stage right and offered a warm welcome to MNCs. A critical rethink is essential to evaluate the performance of MNCs vis-a-vis expectations of the Indian government. When the policy changes were introduced, they were expected to generate faster industrial growth and greater penetration of world markets. However, the performance in this respect has been rather disappointing. While the industrial growth in the first 5 years showed the promise, in the next 5 years the growth tapered off an annual rate of 4.5%. It is observed that the foreign direct investment in India was not directed towards export promotion but was instead oriented mainly towards the domestic market. A major reason for the modest performance of the export sector is the tardy progress in reducing the import duties. This has led to the high cost of domestic production, thereby reducing India's attractiveness as a base for the export promotion. It can well be stated that initial momentum of the high rate of industrial growth could have been sustained only if the foreign investment had been directed towards tapping the export markets. The one sector which has been the bright spot, having shown the robust growth and strong export potential throughout the 1990s and continuing well into the 2000s, is software development and the various other services enabled by the information technology. India's resounding success in this field is one of the most visible achievements of the trade policy reforms. One of the critical factors contributing to its success is the fact that exports in this area depend primarily on the telecommunication infrastructure that has also shown promise and has improved drastically in the post-reform period. Another noteworthy trend is that rather than the central government enticing the foreign investment, the mantle has been done by the states. The states have taken the onus upon themselves to attract foreign direct investment. This is breeding healthy competition among states, but as expected, the competition is slightly lopsided in favor of the progressive and better endowed states. The states are viewing foreign investment as the catalyst for development and are offering the incentives coupled with reduced bureaucratic hassles, thereby enabling ease of conducting business for the foreign investors. India's large reservoir of skilled and unskilled labor has certainly benefited from these MNCs setting up operations in the country. MNCs have been effective in stimulating the domestic production in the country. This has led to the establishment of the ancillary units supplying to mother unit of the MNC. With MNCs giving paramount importance to the quality and cost, this has led to intense competition, higher efficiency and increased production level of the domestic industry. Now, we will summarize what we have discussed in this module. Prior to 1991, India was perceived to be a socialist straitjacket and there was an impending need to bring about the market-friendly reforms. The economic reforms were ushered with the key characteristics of the economic policy being providing access of global markets to the domestic economy, stabilizing the economy through structural reforms and reduction in state intervention in the domestic policy decisions. Multinational corporations known as MNCs are carriers of the foreign capital. They provide services on a global scale, control the policies of their affiliates and implement the business strategies in production, marketing, finance and staffing that transcend the national boundaries. Developing economies are often characterized by the fact that domestic savings are often inadequate to support the amount of investment that is required for development, leading to a saving investment gap. MNCs act as a conduit for bridging this gap in savings by bringing investments from abroad. MNCs bring with them technology and skills such as managerial ability, organizational competence and the knack to avoid inefficiencies. MNCs also generate employment opportunities for both the skilled and unskilled labor. MNCs are the private organizations and by nature they are oriented towards profit maximization. Armed with market reputation, proficient marketing tools, reliable information system and efficient inventory management, these firms proceed with a clear intent to capture the largest share of the markets of the developing economies. MNCs play a vital role in the economic development of the developing countries. MNCs bridge the resource gap and assist the developing countries in their economic development. MNCs aid in reduction of the balance of payment deficit by bringing in the foreign capital for setting up the operations and by generating a net positive flow of trade revenue. MNCs bring sophisticated technological know-how about production processes along with the modern machinery and equipment to capital challenge developing nations. Other concomitant advantages are more employment opportunities, higher real wages for the working population, better quality product for the consumers, more domestic investment in the form of setting up of auxiliary units, etc. However, MNCs come with their own set of pitfalls. They are as follows. Operations of MNCs may reduce the foreign exchange earnings through extensive import of intermediate and capital goods and repatriation of profits, interest, royalties, technical fees, etc. MNCs are often accused of indulging in transfer pricing. MNCs may adopt capital intensive techniques for production which would help the more educated and generate fewer jobs and thus may not turn out to be useful for the labour surplus developing economies. When the policy changes were introduced, they were expected to generate faster industrial growth and greater penetration of world markets. However, the performance in this respect has been rather disappointing. It can well be stated that the initial momentum of high rate of industrial growth could have been sustained only if the foreign investment had been directed towards tapping the export market.